I'm not sure where to start when attempting to describe my experience, so I believe the best place to start is probably at the beginning. My stepfather physically assaulted me as a youngster, and when I was 13, he stabbed me in the chest and abandoned me on the side of the road to die. I was extremely fortunate to be discovered by a passerby and sent to a hospital for treatment and rehabilitation. I was in the hospital for nearly 6 months recovering from this attack. This attack has nothing to do with my near-death experience, but I'd want to provide some background information on myself and the events in my life that led up to my suicide attempt. My mother planned to relocate my siblings and me from the little area where we'd been living to the big city of Toronto after I recovered. This was a cultural shock for me, and it was made very obvious to me that I needed to forget about the attack and move on with my life. There was no counseling or support available to me. Unfortunately, I was unable to do so and was forced to survive in whatever manner I could. When I was 14 years old, I tried suicide for the first time shortly after moving to Toronto, and this set off a downward spiral in my life. After being attacked, I became incredibly unhappy, and my entire existence revolved on wanting to die. I've tried to commit suicide at least 50 times, all pill overdoses. Many of my suicide attempts were nearly fatal, but I never lost consciousness or clinically died until my most recent attempt, about 10 years ago. My previous suicide attempt had such an impact on my life that I've never attempted suicide again and would never do so again. I suffered a significant loss about a month before my most recent suicide attempt. A drunk motorist struck and killed my 15-year-old sister. After my sister died, I completely gave up and nothing in my life mattered any longer. My sister was the only person I was close to or who mattered to me in this world. I felt like I'd spent the majority of my life dealing with despair and questioning my own existence, and she was the only reason I was fighting so hard to live. I completely surrendered, and this time I determined that I would be successful in ending my life. I realized I was in severe trouble, so I checked myself into a hospital psychiatric ward, believing they would be able to protect me from myself or help me find purpose to live. 3 days after checking into the hospital, I approached my nurse and told her that I needed to talk because I wanted to die right then and there. She said she was going on a supper break and would call me later. I felt enraged and resolved to show her what I was made of. I then used a temporary pass to sign out. Because I was voluntary, I was permitted to sign out of the hospital for 2 hours at a time. Despite the fact that I had just stated that I intended to die right then and there, I was allowed to sign out. I left the hospital and went to the first drugstore I saw, where I bought a bunch of pain pills. Then I went to the nearest hotel and checked into a room. Once inside, I ingested the pills and drank copious amounts of booze from the fridge in my room. This was more drugs than I had ever taken in my life, so I was confident it would work. I never gave any thought to the process of dying or what would happen to me. I just assumed that death would be the end of everything and that I would go to sleep quietly, never wake up, and the rest of eternity would be blank and non-existent. I didn't have any firm beliefs. I wouldn't call myself an atheist, but I wasn't sure if I believed in God either. I didn't give it much attention because I didn't care, one way or another, about this element of death. After a few hours of taking all the medicines and drinks, I felt I needed to return to the hospital because I'd gone over the 2-hour limit. I was concerned they would contact the cops, so I decided to return without telling them that I'd taken the tablets. It took me almost an hour to walk 3 blocks back to the hospital because I was so drunk from the medicines and booze that I had to stop numerous times to rest. Due to the late hour, when I finally arrived, I was greeted on the main floor by 2 security guards. I couldn't walk in a straight line and must have smelled strongly of alcohol. They returned me to the psychiatric unit. The nurse then used a flashlight to examine my pupils before telling me to go to bed and sleep it off. I said nothing about taking the tablets. I went to bed as instructed, expecting I would die throughout the night. I awoke the next morning, feeling queasy and sick as a dog, for lack of a better term. I was stunned and perplexed as to why I was still alive. I spent the entire day on the psychiatric unit, vomiting every 15 minutes and racing to the restroom. I felt sick, disoriented, and deathly ill. Yet I was still alive, which was perplexing given the number of medications I'd taken the night before. I began to believe that I wouldn't die after all, and that the drugs would simply pass through my system. Everyone around me could see that I was terribly ill. But because I'd been drinking the night before, the nurses assumed I had a bad hangover. I wanted to inform the nurses about the drugs because I no longer thought I was going to die and hoped they would be able to help me feel better because I was so unwell. But I was frightened of being certified or locked up because of the suicide attempt. As a result, I decided to remain silent. By the evening, I couldn't stand how dizzy, sick, and ill I was. I eventually caved and informed the nurse about the drugs I'd taken the night before. The nurse sounded doubtful and as if she didn't believe me, but she said she'd run it past the doctor on call. Blood tests were immediately ordered by the doctor. I was told that the blood work showed that I'd taken some medications, but it didn't appear to be that bad. Thus, there was no way I could have taken the number of pills that I was claiming. I was perplexed because I knew what I had taken and couldn't understand why my blood work showed a different result. This only strengthened my belief that the medications were merely doing their job and that I wasn't going to die. The doctor determined that they would only connect me up to an IV as a precaution and check my blood pressure every 3 hours to make sure everything was fine. I was on the psychiatric unit for 2 days with an IV hooked up to me when my blood work revealed that I had liver damage. It was then agreed to move me to a medical floor for closer monitoring. Blood work was still being done on me, and each test revealed more and more liver damage. My liver deteriorated to the point that I was told I needed a liver transplant after 2 days on the medical floor, 4 days after taking the pill overdose, and I was sent to the intensive care unit. I was told that because I had purposefully damaged my own liver, I was deemed the lowest priority for a new liver, but that if I did not have a new liver, I would die. At this time, I began to accept the possibility that I would die. However, I was in denial because it had been 4 days since my suicide attempt, and I was now having second thoughts and no longer wanted to die. I was really cognizant and alert at this time, and I didn't believe I was terminally ill. I found it difficult to understand and comprehend what the physicians were telling me. My parents, who were living in New Brunswick at the time, were phoned and told that I needed to travel to the hospital as quickly as possible because I was critically ill. I had already left my body when my parents arrived. I was floating in the air by the ceiling, looking down on myself on the bed. I noticed 8 bags of IV fluids being inserted into the big vein in my neck. One of the bags contained a brownish liquid. The nurse yelled that I was about to go into cardiac and respiratory arrest. Then I found myself sinking through this dark hole. I couldn't see anything because it was completely dark. I became horrified when I saw a brilliant lizard-like snake spring out at me. The next thing I knew, these snake-like monsters were all around me. They were lunging at me as I continued to fall. I was terrified in ways I couldn't put into words. I was convinced that I was on my way to hell, and I began to believe that there must be some type of God. Then, for some strange reason, I remembered a prayer my grandmother used to say with me when I was a youngster that I had completely forgotten about until today. I asked the Lord to forgive my wrongs, it said. If I die before I wake up, I beg the Lord to take my soul. I began praying this over and over again. The next thing I knew, I was looking at my sister who had just been hit and killed by a drunk driver. She was surrounded by a halo of light, and she exuded an incredible sense of calm. She began guiding me, and before I knew it, I was in another tunnel to the right that was ascending. This tunnel was extremely brilliant, with a plethora of incomprehensible hues and a plethora of small white lights. I was traveling at breakneck speed, and there was a large white light at the end. I felt more calm, tranquility, and love than I could ever put into words. I was completely intrigued and in wonder. I was pulled to this light and wanted to keep heading towards it, But as I got closer, I heard a male voice tell me I had to turn around. It wasn't my time yet. This voice kept telling me that I was going to assist, educate, and teach a lot of people. I was suddenly aware that I was back in my body, but I couldn't move or open my eyes. I remember telling my hand to move and trying to open my eyes, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't. I didn't understand why I couldn't do this at the time, but now I believe it's because I left my body during cardiac and respiratory arrest and then re-entered it after being revived. However, I was in a coma after being revived, which explains why I couldn't move or open my eyes.